After an excellent 3 weeks in Tampa, my mate and I decided to expand our horizons and check out the action down in South Florida's Seminole Hard Rock Hollywood. So we hopped in the rented Prius, drove 4 hours down to our Airbnb, which was located a 10-minute walk away from the casino so that we could very conveniently fulfill all our gambling needs for the week we had the Airbnb booked for. But we weren't by ourselves for long, because the very first night we were down there, I was joined by a very friendly face. Brennan, who was the woman I went on a date with the previous Friday night, actually agreed to drive all the way down from Sarasota to meet me in Hollywood, where we had our second date ever. I actually had a bunch of stuff planned for us to do this time. It was a lot more organized. So we went to eat at somewhere in downtown Hollywood. But yet again, we ended up just talking most of the time. And before we knew it, it had already been a few hours and we realized everywhere else was closed, so we decided to go to the Seminole Hard Rock in Hollywood. It was my first time checking it out, and she was there to check it out with me. And again, we just had another amazing date where we talked all night. It was just such a phenomenal night, and it was great to get to know her more. Even reminiscing about it now puts a smile on my face. And mentally, I was just in such a different headspace than I was during Christmas, which was only a few weeks ago at this point. But I wasn't there for romance. I was there to gamble. So the following day after she went home, me and my mate, we headed in to the Seminole Hard Rock to hop in a game of 2-5, which is where this first hand happened. Let's get into it. So I arrived to the casino and there's pretty long lists for every type of game. Fortunately, a 1-2 seat opens up after about 15 minutes of waiting. So I hop in that game whilst I'm still waiting for a 2-5 seat, which is where we play this first interesting hand. So an unknown under the gun player limps, and then I'm in the cutoff with King Queen offsuit. I go ahead and raise it up to 20, which is a pretty large raise, a 10x open over a limp. And then I do get action because an unknown button calls, as does the original limper. So we are 3 ways to a flop of a King 3 deuce rainbow. And then the under the gun player goes ahead and rips it all in for 50. The action's on me here, and I think there's nothing to do but just call. I don't want to deny equity on a board I've got pretty locked down that's very dry. If the button wants to come behind with a gut shot or a pair worse than a king, I definitely don't want to kick them out with a raise. So I think it's a pretty clear just call spot. If you disagree, let me know in the comments, but I decided to call, then the button calls as well. So we're off to a turn, which is the ace of spades, absolute shambles turn. I said we didn't want to deny equity on the flop, but like this is maybe one of 4 potential turn cards that I didn't really want to see. Draw all the aces in the deck. So when the action's on me, I just go ahead and check it over to the opponent. I am concerned that they floated the flop with ace high. 5-3 is also a straight. I do actually lose to a fair bit, so I want to play a bit of pot control and just check it over to the opponent. They don't want to pot control. They go all in for 150. The action's on me here. And yeah, I think it's pretty gross in this spot. Like I said, I think my opponent can definitely have an ace or a straight. A slow played 2 pair or set, not totally out of the question either, so we do lose to a lot. I think if my opponent had a worse pair than mine, they will probably just check it behind, and I can't think of many natural bluffs on this board. Maybe 6-5 would be the only thing. Maybe a really, really loose float with like Jack 10 of spades or something. I just think it's very unlikely, so I do decide to fold my King Queen here, and then fortunately, because the under the gun play is already all in, we do get to see both the opponent's hands. Under the gun shows King Jack offsuit, so we were ahead of them, but then the button shows King 7 offsuit. What? Oh my god, I can't believe it, but the opponent did actually shove a worse pair than mine on the turn. I was shocked to see it, but there you go. They ended up bluffing me, even though they lose to the original under the gun player. But anyway, river's a jack of spades, so the under the gun player does scoop the entire pot. And the button starts talking, you know, she's a bit upset that she lost a hand is what I think is going on. She says, I wasn't sure if I was ahead of you, pointing at the under the gun player, but she was like, I definitely know I was ahead of Stuart Little over there, and pointing at me. And I'm like, Stuart Little? What? Do you mean the kid from the movie, or do you actually mean the rat? And then she didn't respond, so I don't know what she meant by that comment. But fortunately, soon after that hand, I was called over to the 2-5 game, so I scurried away to see if I could try and have better luck in that game. Before we get into the next hand, I just wanted to take this opportunity to invite all of you to join the Anti-Gambling Gambling Club. Head over to leebets.com. We have a bunch of different anti-gambling gambling club t-shirts, hats, and hoodies in all different types of sizes and colours. So head over to leebets.com and join the club. But for now, let's get back into the gambling. So we're in the 2-5 game, which is where this hand happens. a very passive under the gun player opens for 25 straight away. Then they get called from a passive hijack. Then the action's on my cutoff with pocket tens. And already I think this is a pretty interesting spot. As a default play, I probably would just be 3-betting this hand to a 5x open in a live game. But I really didn't want to do that in this spot just because I had a read that the under the gun player was very strong, not only because they had already been pretty tight and passive all session and they were using a really large open size, but just their body language in general just seemed really excited about their hand. So that made me really think they were nutted and that I didn't want to increase this pot with a 3-bet because I'm probably getting 4-betted, maybe always if my read is right. So I took that action off the table, and then I really don't like calling in this spot either. In general, off principle, I don't like calling 5x opens from an early position player, especially if I think their range is really nutted. So I don't really like calling here either, which leaves me with one option, probably the most controversial option, but I think it's the best option in this instance. I think folding's the best play here with this hand. Sound off of me in the comments if you just think I'm a massive nit, but like if you think they're nutted and you're not getting a good price to set mine, and set mining would be kind of face up in this spot, I suppose. Yeah, I just think this hand's a fold, man. And that's what I did in game. I folded my pocket tens. Let me know what you think in the comments. Maybe I'm just a massive nit, but I think it's a good play in this spot, to be 100% honest with you, when I stand behind this fold, and I'm glad I did it in game. I was especially glad I did it in game when I saw the run out of what happened in the hand. So the two players remaining in the hand went heads up to a flop, which was jack deuce deuce, and then a bunch of stuff happens, but they end up getting all in, and under the gun player shows pocket aces. So let's go. I haven't lost my touch. I was accurate with my read. But then the hijack player shows pocket twos for flop quads, and they're going to end up stacking the under the gun player, which I guess we would have done hypothetically if we hit our set. But I think in the long run, this fold is good. Let me know if you disagree. In this next hand, a loose aggressive low jack makes it 20, and then I'm in the small blind with ace 4 of hearts, and clearly I'm trying to fight this nitty image because I go ahead and 3-bet it to 80, and then the low jack calls. So it heads up to a flop of 8-3 deuce with 2 hearts. Pretty strong hit. We've got the combo draw here. I decide to c-bet it. I make it 125, and then the low jack calls. The turn is the 6 of clubs here. I have a very strong draw and pretty low showdown value with my ace 4 kicker here. So definitely want to see if I can get a fold on this straight. I go ahead and bet 300, and then the low jack sticks it all in for 795. Not exactly what I wanted to see. I would have preferred a call or fold. But now we're here in this situation, and then the low jack actually says out loud to us, you can just fold, man, I've got you beat. And when he says this, like, I know some people will say this is a lie to try and manipulate you, but honestly, the guy just seemed like sincere, and I honestly believed him when he said he had me beat. He definitely could have flopped a set, he could have turned to 2 pair, 8-6 suited, 5-4 got in as a straight, but when we're getting this good of a price, we really can't be folding our combo draw here. Plus, not totally out of the realm of possibility that he was lying and he does have a worse draw than ours. I really did believe him, if I'm being honest, but can't fold at this point. I throw in the call, the very strong assumption that we need to get there, and then the river, 8 of clubs. The villain kind of winces, which gives me a bit of hope that maybe he had a worse flush draw, and then he shows 6-2. So we did turn 2 pair, and his 3 pair is going to be good enough to beat my ace high. Let's see if we can turn our luck around in this next hand. I'm under the gun with king queen offsuit. I make it 15, and then I get 3 different callers. So 4 ways to a flop of king 4 deuce with 2 clubs. The action checks here. I go ahead and c-bet 20. Kind of dicey c-betting into so many people, but you're usually not going to go wrong by c-betting top pair in a live game. So I make it 20. I get 2 callers, and then the big blind check raises it to 125. And already I'm very concerned by this bet. Being that they were the last person to act pre-flop, I do give them credit for having pretty much all the offsuit 2 pair combinations. Like when they're getting that good a price to call pre-flop and they've got king 2 offsuit or 4-2 offsuit in the big blind, like I can definitely see them calling and just trying to hit a flop and check raising it once they do hit the flop. So I'm very concerned I'm behind to that, as well as the sets that are possible, and even a combo draw, ace high flush draw as well. If their range is all those hands, we're going to be a dog to that range with king queen. So already I'm concerned I'm behind them, but I also think it's very possible that the other players that already V-pipped in the hand could also have us beat. They could be slow playing a set or 2 pair. So there is actually a pretty high concern that I'm behind here. I don't beat a lot of the range that the callers are going to have, but when you combine, I have to beat all their ranges, plus the strong big blinds range. I actually think the right play here is just to fold, again, with the nitty folds, but I think this is another good spot for it. This one is pretty close though. I wouldn't, if someone did call here, I wouldn't hate the play. Yeah, I don't know if I can. So I do decide to fold, +1 calls, and then the small blind calls as well. So we're the only one that folds, and there's still 3 ways to a turn, which is the Queen of Clubs. Very interesting. It would have given us 2 pair, but we folded, which I think is kind of a good thing, because if we did have 2 pair, I think it's very likely that someone made a flush on this turn, so it would have been a bad spot for us. So yeah, I'm kind of in 2 minds about this turn. Not that it matters what I think, because we're already out of the hand. But anyway, the action checks to the big blind, who goes ahead and rips it all in for 360, +1 calls, and then the small blind folds 6-3 of clubs face up. So they actually turned the flush and then folded. It's a good thing for them they did, because +1 shows A7 of clubs, so they would have turned the nut flush. The big blind still showed, and they had King Jack offsuit, so they were drawing dead, and they still kind enough to show. It turns out they did actually check raise a worse hand than mine, so my read on that wasn't 100% correct, but still glad we got out of the hand, because like I said, we'd have to beat so many different ranges on a run out. Let me know what you think. Maybe it is too tight. Let me know in the comments. Not been a great session so far. Let's see if we can turn it around this next hand with the button straddle on. So it's same as the button straddle in Tampa. The action starts on my small blind, and I have ace-4 of spades. I go ahead and make it 35, and then the button straddler calls. So we are heads up to a flop of 10-6-5 with 2 diamonds, and I just go ahead and check it over to the opponent with this pretty big whiff that we have here, and then they check back as well. So we do get a free turn, which is the ace of clubs putting in backdoor clubs. Let's go. We have top pair. I go ahead and bet it for 25, and then the button calls. So we're heads up to the river, which is another good one. It's the 4 of clubs. Let's go. We make 2 pair. Now in this spot, I think I want to go ahead and bet pretty big on this river for value. I think a lot of the opponent's calling range on the turn is going to be worse ace-x combinations than mine, and I think they're going to be pretty hard-pressed to fold on this river. So I go ahead and bet 100, and then the villain thinks about it for a few seconds before raising to 350. Oh, this is such a gross spot. I really think the opponent just has so many flushes in their range here. Like, being that they called in position pre-flop, even if they had like Jack-2 of clubs, for sure I think they'd defend with that, because they're getting a price to play the pot in position. That would be a completely logical hand for them to have, and if they have Jack-2 of clubs, then they have a lot of flushes on this run out. So very concerned about that. Ace-7 got in as a straight as well. Ace-6 offsuit, Ace-5 offsuit are also hands that we lose to as well, and I think they're going to have all of those in their range. If they're bluffing, I think it's probably going to be with like one of the turned gut shots, King-Queen, King-Jack, Queen-Jack, but I just think there's so many more combinations of essentially better 2 pairs plus. Some possibility they're raising with a worse 2 pair, although it would be pretty thin on this run out. I just think we lose to too much of their range, so I do decide to make a pretty tough laydown. Yet another tough laydown in this vlog. Boy, I'm being nitty since I've come to Hollywood. I go ahead and fold my ace-4. Then the opponent was actually kind enough to show they had king-queen, no clubs. So pure airball bluff. Power to them. It was a good play because they got me off a pretty strong hand. So that wrapped up my first session in Hollywood, which didn't go that well, as you can tell, but I wasn't discouraged. I was back in there the very next day, back in the 2-5, which is where I played this first interesting hand. So I'm under the gun with ace-king offsuit. I go ahead and make it 15, and then a very friendly player in the +1 position who had definitely had more than his fair share of alcoholic beverages across the evening goes ahead and 3-bets me for about the 5th time so far this session. He goes ahead and makes it 30, and then a passive low jack calls the 30. The action's back on me, and this is the 5th time this guy has 3-bet me. If there's ever been a better slam dunk spot to go ahead and 4-bet ace-king under the gun, it's this spot. I go ahead and make it 150, and then the +1 player calls and the low jack folds. So it heads up to a flop of 6-5-3 rainbow. The action's on me here. I went ahead and c-bet 90, and looking back at this play, I actually kind of hate it. I think this is just a good spot to go ahead and check it over and induce bluffs from an aggressive opponent. It's not what I did though. I went ahead and bet 90. And then the +1 player does call. So we're still heads up to a turn, which is the 6 of clubs putting out backdoor clubs. This time I catch up to where I should have been on the flop, and I go ahead and check it over to them. And then they do go ahead and bet 100. Definitely not going to be folding this hand against such an aggressive opponent, although I will say I'm somewhat concerned that they are using a small size to try and get to showdown with a weak 1 pair hand. but can't fold the ace king regardless. We do beat all their bluffs and we're getting a phenomenal price. I throw in the call, so we are heads up to a river. Is the jack of diamonds. I go ahead and check it over to the opponent, who is in the tank, probably a good like 30 seconds or so, like kind of eyeing me down and stuff, and then they're like, all right, and they finally check. I show my ace king, and they end up mucking their hand. They weren't very happy that they lost to ace king here. I'm guessing the big tank was them considering whether they should bluff or not. I'm glad they didn't, because it would have been a pretty gross spot with this hand. You could definitely have a jack in their range or a worse pair. We're not going to have to worry about it because we just rake in this pot with ace king. Let's go. Now we've finally got a bit of momentum going in Hollywood. Let's take it into the next hand. I'm under the gun with king 10 of clubs. I go ahead and make it 15, and then I get a call from a passive button and a tight aggressive big blind. So we're 3 ways to a flop. And it's a good one. King 7 with 2 diamonds. Let's go. We flop trips. When the action checks to me, I go ahead and bet 15 for value. And then both the villains call. Cool. So we're 3 ways to a turn, which is the 10 of diamonds. Let's go. Not only do we make a full house, but it's on a card where a lot of my villains' ranges are going to have made flushes. So I'm expecting to play a big pot here. When the action checks to me, I just go ahead and bomb it. I bet 75. And then the button calls and the big blind folds. So we're finally heads up to a river, which is the 4 of clubs. Now the action's on me here, and I think it's an interesting spot whether we want to just go ahead and overbet here or try and check raise to inflate the pot even larger that way. And I think it's entirely dependent on how your opponent plays, what you want to do in this spot. If you're playing against like a more aggressive opponent, then I definitely like going ahead and check raising. You're just going to inflate the pot larger if they do have a made flush or a worse full house. But if you're playing against a more passive opponent, I think just going ahead and betting is probably going to be the best option, just because I expect a lot of their King X combinations to just check back on this river. So I think being that I labeled the opponent as passive, that probably is the best play here. So I just went ahead and overbet the pot. I made it 300, and then the villain calls. Cool. We show our nuts. We slam our nuts on the table, our nuts in the opponent's face, and then they show King Jack offsuit. So very glad we went ahead and overbet on the river, because I'm pretty convinced that the opponent might have checked back that hand. Even if they don't check back, they probably wouldn't call a check raise. So we got the moment. So we've got the momentum rolling at this point. Let's go. Let's keep it going into this next stand. Under the gun raises to 20. They get 2 callers, and the action's on my big blind. And I must still be running good because I got pocket queens. Let's go. I 3-bet it up to 150, and I get 2 callers, including the original raiser. So we're heads up to a flop of 9-5 for rainbow. The action's on me here, and the under the gun player have been playing pretty aggressive, and in addition to that, we're out of position to 2 people. So I think it's a good spot to go ahead and check it over and do some action, which is what I do. I check it. Then the under the gun player goes ahead and bets 300. Cut off folds. The action's back on me, and I actually think this is a pretty interesting spot between calling and check raising all in. The main reason I would like raising all in is essentially to get a 9x through pocket jacks combination to get all in now before they see a scary card on the turn, like an ace or a king, for example. Having said that though, I think there might be a bit more EV in just calling, mainly because one, I actually think check raising all in might induce hero folds from the pocket jacks through 9x combinations, and additionally we're going to be denying the opponent an opportunity to bluff into us. And if it wasn't obvious from how these hands have been playing so far on the video, the dynamics in Hollywood were a lot more aggressive than they were in Tampa. So I don't know if I really want to give up that EV by ripping it all in here. So I do decide to just call, hoping the opponent continues to bluff on the turn. And the turn is the 6 of clubs, putting our backdoor club draw. And I go ahead and check it over to the opponent like I planned. Then they rip it all in for 650. I snap a Rooney call, and then the opponent shows 7-4 of clubs. So they actually have a really, really strong draw here. Not only do they have a flush draw here, they actually have an open-ended straight draw with their 7x, as well as a bunch of 2-pair and trip outs as well. It was actually a pretty close race. We are a favourite though in this over 2.3k pot. We're just hoping to fade a bunch of outs on the river. And the river, ace of clubs. God dang it. They end up making their flush on the river, and they're going to win this one from us. Of course, being a results tilt monkey, I'm looking back thinking, that probably wouldn't have happened if I check raised all in on the flop, but then I would have missed out on the equity of them continuing to bluff. So I don't know whether it's a mistake or not. Don't want to be results oriented in making that assessment, but yeah, it is an interesting thought, because this is the risk of slow paying sometimes. This can happen to you. So I know that I shouldn't be tilted by results or anything, but I mean, you'll see what I mean in a second, but judging by this next hand, I don't know if I was affected by or not by the tilt. So I'm on the button with Jack 3 suited. I go ahead and make it 15, and then I get 3-bet by an unknown big blind to 35. Now, it's very tempting to call, having position in this hand, getting such a good price when they 3-bet so small, but I mean, my hand is just so shit. I should just be folding Jack 3 here. It seems like a bit of a no-brainer, but clearly I get baited by the cheap price and maybe a bit of tilt. I throw in the call, and then we're heads up to a flop of 5-3 deuce with 2 diamonds. Then the opponent c-bets 40. The action's on me here, and I didn't play this hand pre-flop to flop a pair and then fold. I throw in the call. I'm going to be ahead of all their bluffs on this board, and I think they at least have all the 16 combinations of ace-king. So I throw in the call, and we're heads up to a turn, which is the jack of diamonds, putting in the front door. Diamonds were giving us 2 pair. Let's go. The opponent goes ahead and bets 100. Now, in this spot, I think it's interesting whether we want to call or raise. I think it's very possible that the opponent 3-bet a small size pre-flop with queens through aces because they didn't want to like lose any actions. That would definitely incline me to raise here. But having said that, we're going to miss EV on bluffs if we do just call, and I think ace-king with either the ace or the king of diamonds is going to be a very likely combination that they're going to want to continue to bluff with on this turn, and probably the river as well, to be honest. So I decide to just call. If I had this decision back, I think raising probably is a little bit better, but let me know what you would do in the comments. Then we heads up to a river, which is the 5 of spades. Awful river, counterfeits our 2 pair, but this doesn't slow the opponent down. They go ahead and bet 200. Action's on me here, and I was a bit surprised that they bet on this river, particularly to this sizing. I thought if they did have queens, kings, or aces, I definitely thought they might bet, but they would use a smaller size, something closer to 100. So I was a bit surprised to see this bet, and it made me think, like, maybe they're more polarized than I thought, and they do have either a flush or a bluff. They did continue to bluff with one of those ace-king. That kind of baited me in, like, maybe my jack is good here, and I should throw in the call. That's what I did in game. I get baited to call yet again with my trash hand. I throw in the call, and then the opponent shows queen 5 of clubs. Wow, I was really shocked to see that hand, not only with a tiny 3-bet, but then they played aggressively for all 3 straights. But GG to them, they're going to rake in this pot. But wow, my reads on what hands people have are way off. Clearly, Hollywood plays a lot more aggressive than Tampa did. So hopefully we calm down a bit in this next hand and get off tilt somewhat. I'm on the button with 10-9 hearts. I make it 15. Passive small blind calls, tight aggressive big blind, 3-bets it to 70. The action's back on me, and I actually like calling with this hand. 10-9 suited, a lot better to call 3-bets with than Jack 3 suited. I throw in the call, and the small blind folds. So it heads up to a flop, 8-6-3 rainbow with 1 heart. So not the worst flop in the world. We do have a gut shot, but we definitely didn't spike anything crazy either. And the opponent goes ahead and c-bets 50. Now the action's on me here, and I don't want to fold in this spot. We do have a gut shot and backdoor flush draw equity, and we're getting a good price. So yeah, I think calling's a fine option. But I actually like raising in this spot as well. We're going to have way more set and 2-pair combinations on this board. Plus, I think the opponent's just going to be c-betting a lot of ace-king and ace-queen, maybe even ace-jack offsuit type hands as well, which are going to be very hard-pressed to call off along multiple streets of barreling. So that's what I decide to do here. I raise it up to 150. Then the big blind calls. Not exactly what I wanted to see, but we do have a chance to get there on the turn. Is the 2 of spades. Very innocuous, does not help us at all. The opponent checks it over to me, and in this spot, I wouldn't hate checking to just try and draw for free. Essentially, maybe you get to stab it ace-x again on the river. But being with the more aggressive dynamics that exist in Hollywood compared to Tampa, for sure, I do actually think it's pretty likely the opponent would have still defended some ace-king and ace-queen combinations on the flop, and if we just check it down and we lose to one of those hands, I will not be able to look myself in the mirror at night, so I continue to bluff. I go ahead and make it 200, and then the villain calls, and it's like, okay, at this point, I'm pretty thoroughly convinced that the opponent does have an overpair, or at least a single pair, and I mean, my 10 high is definitely no good. We're either gonna need to get there on the river, or try and bluff into a strong range on the river, and the river is king of diamonds. Okay, so we don't get there on the river, but when the opponent checks it over to me, I actually think this is a good river to bluff on. Like if my opponent does have pocket nines through pocket queens, this might be a little bit of a scary turn card for them if they think I was check raising on the flop and barreling the turn with like king queen of spades, something that turned a backdoor flush draw, king high flush draw. So that kind of inclines me to want to continue bluffing with this hand. It's definitely possible that they did river a set or that they just get stubborn with one of their overpairs and want to call. But just looking at the strong hands I'm going to have in this board that I am going to want to shove with, probably do include some of those king X suited combinations. And if I'm going to be value betting that thin, I definitely want some bluffs in case they do decide to fold one of those flopped over pairs that are now second pairs. So basically, that's a really long way of me saying I'm punterooning this session. I rip it all in for 580 with my absolute airball, 10 high bluff, and then the opponent hits the tank. And I swear, man, it felt like they were in there for 5 minutes. I mean, it was probably only like 1 minute, but you know how time flies when you're bluffing. They're in their tank, they're shuffling back, they're giving me a look down. They don't say anything, but they're just like mixing their cards back and forth, kind of like that. Then they like sigh and then slide the cards into the muck and we take down this pot with 10 high. Let's go! That was the first 2 sessions in Hollywood and it wasn't the hottest start for me, and this third session I'm about to talk about didn't start off the best either. I got into the casino at about 6 p.m. on a Thursday evening and the lists were absolutely massive. I had to wait a full hour just to get into a 1-2 game where I had to play for yet another hour before I finally got called for 2-5. But now I'm finally in the 2-5 streets, which is where this first interesting hand happened. So I'm under the gun with Queen 9 of hearts, I make it 15, and then a tight aggressive button, 3 bets to 40. The action's back on me here, and I hate calling 3 bets out of position, but we are 1.2k effective, and the villain has given me a very good price to see a flop. So I do decide to call here, getting baited by a cheap price yet again. Might be a mistake, but let's not be pre-flop police here. We're heads up to a flop of ace, queen, queen. Let's go. We flop trips on this rainbow board. I check it over to the villain who goes ahead and c-bets 75. Now the action's back on me here, and my initial instinct is, oh, I should check raise. They have a lot of combinations ace, king in their range, and I want to get value from it, try and build this pot and get all in at some point. But having said that, the large bet on this flop is kind of suspicious. Like, if they did have ace, king, why are you bombing this flop? Like, what are you concerned about denying equity to? It just seemed more like they wanted me to fold, and being that the dynamics are a lot more aggressive in Hollywood, it seemed much more likely to me that they actually had a bluff. And being that we have queen 9 as opposed to queen jack or queen 10, it's a lot more likely they're bluffing with a jack 10 suited combination, with a king jack combination. So I think with this queen 9, it's a good spot to just call. So I decide to slow play a bit here. I throw in the call and we heads up to a turn, which is the 2 of diamonds, putting out backdoor diamonds. I continue with my trap. I check it over to the opponent. Goes ahead and bets 100. Action's back on me here. And in this spot, I'm actually pretty convinced the opponent is bluffing with the major bomb on the flop and then down bet on the turn. Somewhat possible they have a worse ace-x combination, but will that hand really call a check raise anyway? I mean, maybe with the aggressive dynamics in Hollywood. It's not what I did in game though. I decided to just call. This might be a mistake in retrospect though. Maybe I should just try to inflate the pot so I can get all in on the river. Regardless though, we're heads up to the river. What do you know? The river, queen of clubs. Let's go. We make quads, and it's such a good spot because if the opponent does have one of those weaker ace-x combinations, they're going to think they have the nuts now. So I go ahead and check it over to them, and then they check back. Oh, god damn it. We could have run a really big pot if they had an ace there. Clearly they don't. I end up showing my quads, and the opponent was kind enough to show they had pocket kings. So I don't know how much more value we could have got from that hand, even on this run out. But regardless, we show our quads, and we actually end up winning the high hand promotion for the half hour. It was worth about $70. Clearly the promotions are not as generous in Hollywood as they were in Tampa, but I'm not going to complain about free money. I'm going to take my $70 and the pot with a smile on my face. So we're back on a good track, winning a hand. Let's see if we can keep the ball rolling. I'm in the cutoff with pocket 4s. I make it 15, and then literally everyone calls. So we're 4 ways to a flop of ace-6, 4 with 2 clubs. Let's go. We hit the set. God, that is a good feeling to hit a set in No Limit Hold'em. The small blind decides to lead out for 10. The big blind calls, and yeah, I know, I've been a bit passive so far in this video, and you're probably expecting me to just call here, but nope, absolutely cannot do it. Let's build a pot against the opponent's flush draws and ace-x combinations. I go ahead and make it 50. Then the button calls, the small blind leader calls, and the big blind actually decides to fold. But we're still 3 ways to a turn, which is the jack of diamonds putting out backdoor diamonds. Small blind checks it over to me, and in this spot, I think I just want to go ahead and bomb it. I think the opponent's going to have a lot of ace-x combinations. Jack of diamonds is a great card. It gives them more 2-pair combinations, plus a lot of their ace-x diamond combinations probably aren't going to fold at all. Plus 2 pairs also pretty likely. I don't think those hands are necessarily going to want to 3-bet on this board. So I go ahead and make it 150. The button folds, and then the small blind rips it all in. Not going to fold my set here. I throw in the call. And then the river is the jack of clubs, giving us a full house. Not that we needed it though, because the small blind shows ace-9 offsuit. So hey, the villain did have a ace-x combination, but it's no bueno against our full house. And we're going to rake in this pot and lock up our first winning session here in Hollywood. So that wrapped up the first 3 sessions down here in Seminole Hard Rock Hollywood. But I still did play one more session on a Friday evening down in Hollywood. And let me tell you, this session was the craziest one I played in Hollywood by far. To see what happened there, you've got to subscribe to my YouTube channel, because that's what the next video is going to be about. But for now, I'm out of here. Peace.